What's up, YouTube? So today I want to talk you through how I made this color-based inspired breakdown, drop, and transition for the Psytrance track from my latest album. So I'm going to post a link to where you can listen to the full thing in the description. And also there's another technique that I used in this kind of drop, and I'm going to post that video in the description as well. But yeah, let's walk through how I created this drop. Okay, so in this video, I want to talk about some of the main elements here and how I kind of transitioned from that color bass, choppy lead sound into that percussion loop, the kind of mix of very synthetic sounds and very organic sounds. Because there's a couple of interesting techniques that I use there, but I'm going to start off by just explaining how we created the sound from scratch. So this actually started off as a kind of Reese sound in Phase Plant. So let's actually just show you the basic sound, what we started with over here. So it's a pretty simple patch. It's just a analog saw wave with some unison, 4 voices, slight bit of detune that's running into a filter, and then we have another group with just a sine wave on that. That's creating that kind of lower layer, and that's actually detuned -12. So the trick about getting that kind of like wobbly sound is to apply some LFO to the pitch, right? The master pitch over here. And then we use the pressure to control that LFO amount. And so the magic actually happens in the, like how we actually write the MIDI pattern. For example, if we open up the pressure over here, you'll see here that there's also this kind of like pitch bending happening. So there's a slight pitch bend to about plus 0.3 semitones. And then it pitch bends to the next note and pitch bends up an octave. So get very creative with that kind of pitch bending for these kinds of Reese sounds. And then here you'll notice that when it pitch bends up an octave, we use that pressure to kind of give that LFO that wobble. And that gives it this kind of like high Reese effect. Pretty simple stuff. And then that runs into Arturia Dist Coldfire. For some reason I need to activate that plugin. And this is using the preset drums ripper. And then this runs into Wider. And then Dynamics, which I believe just sidechains from the kick. So that's basically like how I created the basic loop or sample. But then notice here how in the MIDI, at the end here, this pitch bends all the way down -75, like as low as it can possibly go. And so that basically turns that unison, because there's these detuned voices, at a high pitch, the frequency of those voices that are kind of like detuned from each other is rhythmic, but because it's tuned so high, it creates this inharmonicity, right? But when you tune it down really low, that inharmonicity becomes a sort of polyrhythm or some kind of interesting rhythm. And so I use that kind of concept to pitch bend from the Reese sound all the way down into a rhythm. So this is the effect of that. Okay, so I rendered that out as a sample, and you'll see here when that pitch goes down, it kind of turns into that rhythm like I was saying. So the interesting thing here is that what I did is I basically chopped that last bit and then used the stretch or like the warp modes to stretch those rhythms that are slightly off the beat till that they're on the beat. Do you know what I mean? To kind of take it from what sounds kind of like a random rhythm into something that's more of an actual kind of recognizable rhythm. When it's in solo, you actually notice that transition if you listen very carefully. You only really notice once the rhythm kind of loops over again. But the only reason that you're noticing it is because now you've recognized that pattern. Does that make sense? And that's a good thing, because now you've realized, oh wait, this is a rhythm. And at that part is when some of the other elements start to come in. So you'll notice here that I've got this drum beat, and I've actually programmed this to that exact rhythm. So what I did is I just observed where the hits are in the bar, boom, 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 boom. And then I just added hits wherever there's a hit. You know what I mean? And so they kind of like sync up together quite nicely. Okay, so let's talk about the processing that I actually put onto this channel over here. So I started off with a little bit of EQ to cut out the lows below about 200 and just remove some of the mid-range over here. And then what I did is I created this snap heap preset over here. Okay, so here on the snap heap, I set this sidechain input over here that affects these first two audio followers. So that's basically controlling the gain and the high pass filter at the beginning. Those are basically being controlled by this audio sample over here, which is a vital bass sound, which I rendered out. You'll notice that it's got that kind of like rhythm. And so I basically wanted to impart that bass rhythm onto the re-sound that we created. So, I mean, you could do this without Snap Heap. You could just do this with traditional sidechain or whatever the case is. But I wanted to include it with that kind of filter movement at the same time. So that's why I used Snap Heap for that, because it's kind of nice multi-effects, creative multi-effect system that you can do that kind of thing with. Okay, so then I used pitch map and soothe kind of in combination, because sometimes pitch map can add a little bit too much of the kind of like high harmonics or the ringy tones. And then the mix here is I basically put these into a layer and then modulated this mix using this automation curve. So as it kind of transitions into that rhythm, pitch map kind of like dials back. So it turns from less of a synthy sound into more of a raw rhythmic sound, and then that kind of percussion transitions in, and then it turns back into the Psytrance track. So this is basically with the pitch map and everything loaded up. So for some reason, because it was disabled now, it's reset this key transform over here. So this is incorrect, like what it says here. But you'll notice here that it's in, I think this is set to F, pentatonic minor, but this is not C chromatic. But I mean, when you, for some reason, when you disable and enable pitch map, it does that. It like resets just the visuals of that key transform. But you'll notice here that these are still tuned. Does that make sense? So anyway, this is that sound. Okay, let's talk about these vocal chops. So I actually did a tutorial on how to do this technique. I'm going to post the link in the description. So I'm not going to go through the entire, like, how we created the sound, because it's kind of, there was a little bit of extra processing involved. So it's, as you can see, it's the same preset from that video, but I've actually loaded a different sound in here. So what I did with that preset is I ran that through pitch map and then reloaded it back in. And so the sounds that we're getting here, the sounds that are loaded in here into the like granular chopper have already been processed with pitch map. Does that make sense? And the reason that I do that is it kind of gives it a much more tape choppy kind of sound. You don't have that kind of tail from pitch map, and it's like very much sounds like you're chopping up audio files and samples. but you get that kind of live playability of being able to program it in MIDI. Do you know what I mean? Like just triggering notes and then using this kind of scrub parameter here. So what I did was, instead of manually like modulating this with automation, I set this to a parameter, an MPE parameter. So I didn't really have to think about automation and anything like that. I literally just load up, like add in a MIDI and then change this timbre parameter, and then each chop basically goes in, and like for example this chop, and now we can choose what it sounds like. Do you know what I mean? So here, by just moving this, we can now audition this. You see what I mean? So you can get this very kind of choppy, granular control. They sound like those kind of old school Skrillex vocal chops. So that's basically how I did it. And as you can see, like I programmed in the hits kind of manually. So these hits over here, this actually uses a Bitwig thing where you can put in one long note like this, and then over here in the inspector, you've got this thing called operators. And what that does is it allows you to chop the note, and then you can kind of create these non-linear chops. And then what you can do is you can actually right-click, slice at repeats, and then each one you can change the timbre for. So that's how I got these kind of more breaky chops. So it's just about like getting the right MIDI pattern there, I guess. And what I did is I basically played this alongside the original sound that I had created and kind of like tried to get this groove going together with the sound. Like you can hear where there was this repeat. I was basically trying to get that to counteract nicely with that original sound. So it was about like trying to get those sounds to kind of really interact nicely. Then I just rendered that out as a sample because I just like to do that. I think like it's just a little bit easier to deal with once you've done all that kind of really involving stuff in Bitwig. You can just disable the track and hide it. So I can always go back in there and edit these things if I need to. But now I just don't have to think about it. The sample is finalized. It's in the track. I can just worry about now mixing it. Do you know what I mean? So the Vital preset that creates this bass sound is actually pretty simple. We can go through creating this together real quick. So here what we can do is we can open up an instance of Vital. We can put in basic shapes, and then we can put in harmonic series. We want to turn this down 1 octave and then boost the wavetable position all the way up. And then here we want to enable just a little bit of noise. And then we can just, a little touch of noise. So then here, let's add some soft clip distortion. You can hear we're already getting halfway there, right? And so the trick of this is to modulate that level. And then just create some interesting shapes. Get some MIDI patterns going in nicely. So here what I did is I actually wrote the MIDI, bounce in place in Bitwig. I don't think I did any chopping, but then right at the end here, there's a pitch bend in the bass that I actually programmed in on the sample, not in the bass. But I didn't end up using it. I actually just muted that part because it didn't sound so nice. You see what I mean? It was a bit bare. Whereas the whole pitch bend from that rhythm, that chord rhythm thing, just kind of worked so much better. So I guess it's about just being creative, throwing the sounds in there, seeing what works, trapping them to work together, and then just removing everything that doesn't work and just kind of like go with the groove, go with the flow, see what fits in there. I think there's a little atmospheric hit over here. That's just a simple saw wave lead in Vital with some big reverb on it. But as you can see, I've used it very minimally. Just, you know, you barely even notice it there in the rest of the arrangement. It just kind of adds that nice atmospheric background. The other thing I want to talk about is how the sound that leads into this. It's this sound over here. That is basically just this first chop over here, and then I duplicated it, put it on its own channel, and then did that operators thing, which I just showed you now with the Bitwig thing, and then added a pitch and a gain. So it basically like fades in from a low pitch into a high pitch, but it uses that same operator trick where we basically make one long sample, open it up, cut it like this, and then just do the operators thing like that. And then I just pitch bend upwards. And it's just about getting that timing on the dot, you know what I mean? Yeah, and it's just a basic kick and snare that I made in some sound design session that I was having a little while ago. The reason I put them into their own group is because I wanted them to sound like perhaps differently processed. You know, the stuff with like the Psytrance kick and bass stuff is like kind of so methodically perfect, whereas I wanted this part to be very kind of messy, but also still quite colorful at the same time, if that makes sense. I feel like it creates quite a nice transition or contrast between this and the very kind of like static bass Psytrance sound, you know what I mean? So yeah, what else? I think that about sums up everything in this part. Okay, there's some other loops that I just took from other parts of the track and then just added those in just to fill up the space a little bit, but those are pretty much unnecessary. I mean, if we go in there, we could probably mute these percussion loops and we won't miss too much. Do you know what I mean? Just adds a little bit of extra groove there. Cool, that's about it for today. I'm going to make another video going through the more Psytrance-y elements of this track. I actually want to show you something interesting about how I created the bass for the Psytrance part of this track. But I'm going to do that in another video just to keep things a little bit more concise. Maybe some of you don't want to learn about Psytrance bass. Maybe you want to learn about this kind of stuff. Maybe you don't want to learn about this kind of stuff. Maybe you just want to learn about Psytrance bass. So yeah, I'm going to try to keep things a little bit more concise like that. So anyway, yeah, thanks for tuning in. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you haven't yet, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.